All right, hello everyone. Shannon, it's June 22nd, so I cannot believe how quick summer's going by. I think the last video we did was over a month ago. Got a lot of really good reception from it. I think most growers like to just hear kind of a recap what we're seeing out in the field. Right here, we are standing in a 7-acre seed increase of cropland Emerson's. So last year we had about a 2-acre increase on Doug Stouts. We had a foliar trial in them. This year we didn't need all this for foliar treatments, but I think we have about 3/4 of an acre. Behind the camera, we actually have a block of Emerson's that we seeded on April 8th. We've got foliar trial there, and then we're also following that up with some foliar treatments out here. This flat was extremely wet. Jason Boyd, Jeff and Jason farmed this field. In fact, there was about 5 acres that went to prevent plant with the canola. It was just too wet, they never could get on it. This stayed wet till probably the end of April. There was actually some standing water on the west end of this flat. I think if they had a bigger tractor when I seeded it, I would have got stuck. This was GS Bounty last fall, extremely heavy residue, a lot of straw out here. Jason, they did a light chisel on it last fall, and then I came out, harrowed it, and then direct seeded with our Great Plain drill. Ended up with a beautiful stand, a little bit of fusarium out here. I think that's one thing, Shannon, the last week, we've had a lot of, our daytime highs are getting into the mid 80s. I was curious, I walked the winter wheat strip trial over the weekend, AP Exceed, which we know is a little more prone to ceph stripe. Even though there was a little bit of striping in that variety a month ago, now that we've gotten some hot weather, starting to be a lot of white heads showing up in that strip trial. Really, that's the only variety I've noticed that's kind of breaking through with some ceph. But it's maybe 1% of the heads. It's probably not going to impact the yield of that. Been in a lot of wheat the last 2 weeks. Pretty good crop out there. It's amazing the areas that picked up, that 2 weeks ago when we got all that rain. Some of those growers are going to probably cut maybe the best crop they've ever cut. I've been in some wheat that's just phenomenal. If you did miss those showers, like here in Genesee, I think since May 1st, we're kind of wrote this down right at about 1 inch. So a lot better than last year. I think for the crop year, we're 20.5 inches here in Genesee. Colfax, since 1st of May, they're over 1.5 inches. For the crop year, 22 inches. That's phenomenal. That's 4 inches above average. Fairfield, Spokane County, kind of that Tico, Tensett area. I know one of the growers up there, he picked up almost 4 inches of rain in the last 2.5, 3 weeks. So really good crop though, even here in Genesee, it's definitely above average. I don't think it's gonna be the bin buster like we thought, like 2020, but overall a really good crop. Just like the wheat, we're seeing a little bit of ceph stripe popping through, those white heads starting to show. These garbs look phenomenal. It was pretty wet when I seeded this. Came back in, harrowed, ran Sharpen and Valor, I think 1.5 ounces of Valor and 2.5 ounces of Sharpen. We ended up getting, we didn't get the rain to get that activated. Quite a bit of lamb's quarter coming. Had Macy out here making a tough application. Fairly effective. I think with our 4-wheeler, we can get up to about 13, 14 gallons per acre. About the most pressure we can get, Shannon's about 30 PSI. So maybe didn't get as quite a good of coverage as most of our growers' self-propelled sprayers. Probably got 70% of lamb's quarter. Of course, it's, I walk out here now and there's a scattering of it still. I don't think it's gonna lead to yield loss. So our Emerson's that we seeded, those were seeded April 8th. Those are about the 21st node. So there's actually starting to set some pods. They look really good. These are just, just starting to bloom or not quite. Shannon, I know I was on the Pullman rim last week, walked a field to shine. That's probably got to go really, really good. What are you seeing in your region?
Yeah, Kyle. First on beans, you know, we're in the middle of the season for spraying, probably on the tail end. Like you said, the beans seeded a month ago. They're full bloom, setting pods. This site behind us, I probably need to come out here tomorrow and make that bloom timing foliar application. We're right in that timing in the west side also, in that Pullman corridor. We've got most of our beans sprayed up, still no Ascochyta blight at all. I don't think you've seen any either. Very clean beans. We've actually had quite a few growers even leave out a fungicide this year and just focus on that plant health, substituting like a micronutrient product or something like that. You know, as far as like what we've seen in the trials for foliar inputs, Maxin for beans has been a really good input. And so that's what we've kind of used to boost that plant health rather than a fungicide. If there's concerns of any Ascochyta, we've been saying go with like an Everlon or one of these more price sensitive fungicides that still have really good coverage because it has that group 7, that Exemium, but really haven't seen any Ascochyta blight, so not too much of a concern there. We've still been doing quite a bit of work with the NutriScan on beans. We talked about this in previous videos and at the grower meeting last fall. Last year in the trials, the NutriScan was showing a sulfur deficiency, and we made that application with the sulfur product last year. We really didn't see good responses. We kind of chalked it up to just not having data points with that NutriScan technology. But one thing interesting that we're learning this year, and we're still seeing those sulfur deficiencies, but I think it's really important what sulfur product you use, and that's what I'm excited to see this year, is we're making that sulfur application. Sulfur, boron, and zinc is really our primary inputs according to the NutriScan on the beans right now. But I think it's important what sulfur product you use, and that's one thing that maybe I did wrong last year is we used a product and it ended up being elemental sulfur, had some micronutrients with it, but I didn't pay attention to what kind of sulfur product it was. And I think that's maybe why we didn't see much of a result. And so that's what I'm excited this year. We found a micronized sulfur product with some micros like boron and zinc. We're looking at that in the trials. Going to be really exciting if we see that response, if we see that positive response, and you know, it shows that the NutriScan is working on beans and we can apply based on that. We're really excited to see the results on that. But I just think it's important knowing what products you're using based on if it's sulfur or amino acid or whatever that might be.
Right. I think looking back at our growing degree days, this is a pretty interesting stat. For Genesee, the weather station's about 80 yards from us. So one thing I really like is the data that it records for us. So since March 1st, we're at 598 growing degree days. Wow. Last year at this time, we were at 590. So we're actually warmer than we were last year. I think the big thing, you know, we've had warmer nights. That really helps as well. Interesting drought year of 2021. That seemed like a really hot, dry summer. Of course it was. But we really didn't see that heat show up till last week of June is when it really started impacting crops. 590 growing degree days. So we're actually 10 growing degrees ahead of where we were from that year or even last year. Good thing, we definitely have more submoisture in the profile. I think, you know, putting a shovel in out here, it's pretty wet. It's amazing, you know, you go down 2 inches and the moisture's still here. 2022, that was probably the last really big crop that we cut on the Palouse, or at least here in the Genesee area. Very cool summer, 287 growing degrees at this time. So definitely getting the heat. You know, I talked about some Ceph stripes starting to show up in some of the wheat. A little bit of dryland foot rot out there showing up in wheat, kind of those upper ridges. In the garbs, you know, there's very few of these out here, but this would be Fusarium. Typically a good way to do it, you know, pull that plant, take your knife, cut into that xylem tissue. If it's a gray or brown, that definitely Fusarium. Usually, probably the biggest thing there, cold, wet soils when you're seeding, and then when you switch over to hot, dry, get that stress period. Once again, very, very good stand. You know, I don't even know if I see another one from where I'm standing, but that's a good indication. A lot of growers see this, or field reps out in the industry, and they say, oh geez, you got Ascochyta blight. You can see these tops are starting to wilt, but that, you know, classic fusarium symptom. The other thing that I can see out here, growers are starting to notice, if you did make that tough application, some guys ran a tough metribuzin. If you did do that, you are going to bark those plants up. You can tell when Macy did that out here, you know, they're about the 6th, 7th node. And that's kind of where that lower tissue is kind of a little bit chlorotic. So a lot of times, you know, people will walk out, see that, oh geez, do I have, you know, ascochyta infection? It was probably that herbicide application. Some growers are going, you know, pretty high rates of clethodim with a lot of MSO, going after Italian ryegrass. You're going to see that same burn with that MSO. So something to keep in mind, that this is a very healthy crop. Chickpeas, Mediterranean crop, they love this warmer temps. Really 80 degrees, that really gets them to switch from the vegetative to the sexual stage where they'll start setting pods. And yeah, I'm pretty excited. This is a seed increase. We hope next year we'll have an 80, 100 acre field of these. There's a lot of interest in them with this variety in the Midwest too, with Winfield, and yeah, we'll see where they go. Jumping over to canola, Shannon. This field behind us, Boyd's, like I said, it was real wet by the time, you know, by the time they could get in here and get it seeded. I think it was around May 5th, about the same time I seeded these Emersons. You can see canola way off on the horizon. That was seeded April 10th. So completely full bloom. This field, just, you know, by the weekend, it's going to be completely yellow. I think one thing really standing out in our trials is 9551 again. That variety just looks really good. It's pretty neat when you got all these varieties seeded by themselves. I think 9551 started blooming at least a week sooner than anything else. We'll see how it finishes. I can assume it's probably going to win the trials. So a lot of it went out. That was #1 canola variety that we sold. According to Winfield, they have one that's maybe even better. So I guess we'll see how that does. Just funny, these better genetics just keep stacking them up on each other. And it seems like, yeah, if a variety lasts 2 or 3, 4 years anymore, that's got a pretty long life.
It's pretty exciting too on a year like this year. You know, the last 2, 3 years we've kind of gotten beat up. You know, our canola starts blooming, we get into those 90 degrees. Yeah. Canola is very similar to like peas, where if you get in that 89 degrees or higher, it actually sterilizes that pollen and aborts those blooms. So we've really kind of got beaten up the last few years from that early heat wave. This year, especially like you talked about with 9551, a lot of 9551 acres blooming that early, you know, blooming a little bit earlier, beating the heat. We haven't got into that 90 degree yet. I think when you pulled the weather report, you said the warmest we've gotten was 89 degrees, or 88 degrees, excuse me. And so I'm pretty excited this year. I just think a lot of our early seeded canola has got that high yield potential, blooming early, being able to finish early. I know Jack Brown with U of I used to always say 250 pounds yield gain for every week in bloom, increased in bloom. And so trying to get those varieties like 9551 to bloom as early as possible, fill those pods. You know, I think we have a really high yield potential opportunity in canola this year.
I do too, I totally agree. I think this year we have 4 canola trials. We actually have a really neat canola trial up at Fairfield on Dagons. Actually bluegrass takeout, I think that's what most of those Spokane County growers or Benewah County, you know, they're taking their bluegrass out and going in with a canola crop. Really helps get last of that volunteer bluegrass terminated. Great stand, pretty excited up there. 9551, we were up there. I think Shannon, you ran up on Friday, made the foliar treatments in that trial, and it's, yeah, it was just, I think once
just right
again,
at first bloom, yeah. It's really good stand of canola. Yeah, even up there, it's getting those canola blooming earlier. It's going to be a pretty exciting year for canola.
What's really exciting is our forecast. So this is Monday. I think Friday might ruin the weekend. If anyone's going camping, it might not be the weekend to go, but looks like we're going to be, our highs are in the low 60s and maybe up to 3/4 inch of rain between Friday and Sunday. So this time of year, every inch of rain makes about 7 bushel on wheat. You know, if most of our winter wheat around here right now is kind of in that milk stage, maybe those upper south slopes are into that soft dough stage, but getting that, you know, even a half inch, it would just add test weight, a little better kernel fill, especially on those sucker heads, and yeah, it'd be $1 million rain if it comes to fruition. Haven't heard an airplane fly by us yet, but there's still, you know, we talked about it a month ago. I was really concerned about aphid in the winter wheat. Started seeing aphid around the 1st of April, which is about as early as I've ever seen them show up. Since then, they've just slowly been building. I think a lot of the wheat I was in last week, you walk through, you know, there's just hot spots. You know, your pant legs would get sticky. You know, the heads would be loaded. I always, you know, when I'm determining, when they move up into the head, a really good threshold is I grab a handful of stalks. That's usually about 40 heads. And if I start counting heads, and if 10 heads have 10 or more aphid, that's usually the threshold till about soft dough stage. So if, you know, it'd probably pay if you could get your aerial applicator to go out there, spray those north toe slopes, maybe those flats. Other than that, I think a lot of this wheat's probably getting to that point where, you know, probably doesn't need to be sprayed. But once again, get out there and scout. I know I had 2 or 3 farmers in Genesee the end of last week decided to pull the trigger. So 22, across the creek, we had that trial. You know, we picked up 25 bushel with that insecticide application. So they will cause some damage. I know a lot of growers are like, I'm done, I'm not spending any more money. My bank account's dried up, and I completely get it. But pay attention, especially later maturing varieties like, you know, maybe like a sockeye or something like that tends to be on the later side. Those would be the ones maybe keep an eye on. Rust, it's amazing how, you know, the genetic resistance that we have now. We had that week of warm weather, I think it was the first week of May. Really kind of like a variety like Shine, it really pretty much stopped it in its tracks. I thought it was just slowly going to get worse and worse, but most of that rust went necrotic. However, varieties like Jet, you know, continue to get worse and worse. Nova, of course, GS Bounty. Our winter wheat trial up at Dave and Scott Cornwall's, I was up there on, I think last Thursday, just kind of cleaning up alleyways, getting ready for the crop tour on Thursday up there. A lot of stripe rust in that trial. There was a couple varieties, experimentals, I was very excited about. And the flag leaf's completely gone. So, wow. In fact, the heads are, you know, it's moved up into the heads. It's probably going to take 40% of the yield off some of those varieties. So, really neat trial up there. Field day up there is June 25th, this Thursday. So, probably a couple days after this video gets posted. We hope everyone can come. We have a really neat pulse trial at Brian Teague's, and then that canola trial we're going to tour. And then we got a great, I think, Sean's ordering tri-tip and pork ribs from CNL Lockers. So, and then Genesee, this will be June 30th. Hopefully it's done raining by then. It might be a little damp out here, but pretty excited we got some rain coming. So, Shannon on winter wheat. How many guys, you know, on the Pullman rim ended up pulling trigger, spraying for rust, aphid? A lot of guys ran Ignite treatment late, kind of cutting that rate back. What do you think we'll see from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's something we've been asked quite a bit, and I was going to mention that, you know, both of us have had a lot of questions of like, hey, what would we gain by putting that late application of insecticide on, maybe some micronutrients, you know, post-anthesis, probably at that head fill, milky stage we're going to address first. And we really didn't have much data on it. The last few years we've been so hot and dry, we haven't made those later applications. And so that's something we did this year, is we went out into our foliar trials, we made a few of those late applications, looking at just insecticide, and then looking at insecticide with a micronutrient package. You know, we used Ignite, we used a pretty low rate, just trying to get that biostimulant portion was really what we were focusing on. As we started to get warmer, we'd go out with like 24 ounces of Ignite, getting those biostimulants, and then the boron and zinc to really help with that head fill. we had quite a few guys make that application late in the season, especially on the rim. You spent some time on the Pullman rim last week, but any of the red wheat, it got that late application, especially on insecticide and stripe rust. Those are probably the weaker varieties for stripe rust. And so they got that late fungicide application, throwing in dimethoate, maybe some micronutrient products. Very high potential out there. You probably saw it. It seems like from the south end of that, Uniontown area, the further north you get, the better it gets. Like you said, Colfax being further ahead in moisture, just the yield potential gains the further north you go. But like you said, very spotty on the aphid pressure. I think, as the canyons are drying up, we're starting to see more of it come up out of the canyons. Now with all the cowboys dropping hay, we're probably getting some of that pressure. And so, a spotty, I asked you before this, what would you do if you were a farmer? And you're like, if an airplane could go spot spray, that'd be pretty nice. Just spray some of the canyon edges or draw bottoms, something like that. But yeah, I think we're kind of getting to the end of that season. We're, especially on that early ground, we're probably getting a little late for even some economical damage. Hopefully getting out of that period. I'm really excited to finish out the season though, and hopefully get a good shot of rain this weekend.
Oh, it sounds great. I think a couple things that stood out to me. We don't have a lot of peas in this area. I know Sophie and Keith and Mike down in Dayton or up northern Whitman County, Spokane County. That's majority of where our peas are. The few peas I've swept around here, just like aphid in the winter wheat, pod weevil, are crazy.
Yeah.
So if you haven't sprayed your peas, really after when each plant has about four sets or 4 blooms on them, or right when you start maybe seeing that visual pod, I'd probably get out there, get them sprayed. I think, we've had really good luck with Bifenture in our trials, knocking those weevil out. Sometimes in our pulse trials, when you plant a few peas in the middle of a garb field, they just get annihilated. When we run the combine through, every pea has a hole in them. But the Bifenture, seems like it's worked really good. And aphid this year, I think the last 2 or 3 years, you really couldn't find an aphid in a pulse crop. Once again, there's quite a few aphid out there. Maybe not at the threshold yet, but they're definitely slowly building. Peas look phenomenal. I think once again, this rain we're gonna get, it's really gonna benefit that crop. Same with canola. Lentils, I haven't swept many lentils yet. The couple I have, there's some Ligas out there. Threshold for Ligas, if I can pick up 5 per 20 sweeps, that's usually a threshold I like. One thing nice on lentils, you can throw in that, run a pint of dimethoate on lentils in one application, and that pretty much takes you through the rest of the growing season. That's going to get the aphid and Ligas. I was on a garb field on the rim. I couldn't find army worms, but I saw a lot of yellow moss flying in the air. So I think that's one thing, keep an eye on. Maybe if they're out there laying eggs right now, we're really not going to see that for probably 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know, it's maybe 1 in 15 years that there's a handful of fields that I tell farmers it'd probably pay to spray. Seems like Pullman Rim, that's always kind of seemed to be a hot spot for army worms. Jumping into spring wheat, we'll wrap this up, but spring wheat looks pretty darn good. We don't have a lot of spring wheat around Genesee. If you have Italian ryegrass, that's the first thing a lot of farmers are deciding to opt out of. It just seems like we lose ground on spring wheat. I think winter wheat, the Italian ryegrass this year, especially down in the Genesee area, is pretty bad. Our group 15s last fall, I just think we missed that weather window. I think a lot of that ryegrass was germinated by the time we actually got the rain with the Anthem Flex, and we missed that first flush. I think we're going to make a video with Alba. They maybe have a new seed treat that looks phenomenal, or really gives growers more options. Maybe look at a Rygrick. We don't have a lot of seed of that one, but being able to run those higher rates of metribuzin. But like I said, probably put a video on that and get that released maybe sometime this fall. But jumping back to spring wheat, you get up north, we still put out 100,000 acres of soft white spring wheat this year. Stands look phenomenal. I know some of the ridges are maybe starting to fire off a little bit, but Ryan, I'd say it's completely headed out. Anyone who has that variety, Bush is a little later. I was thinking it's 4 or 5 days later than Ryan. I think what I've seen this year, maybe it's about a week later than Ryan ahead. As this winter wheat starts to dry up, of course, there's a lot of aphid out there in it. The adults, they're going to fly out. And where are they going to go? They're probably going to go to spring wheat. So that would be one really keep an eye on. I think stripe rust, maybe with this rain coming, Ryan sometimes would pay. If you think you're okay, I'm going to pull the trigger on my spring wheat. Maybe it hasn't started flowering yet. Run that dimethylate, throw in a cheap like Propy. That'd probably do the job. If we get hot again next week, which kind of looks like 4th of July, we're back into the mid 80s. That H-tap's gonna kick in. It's gonna mostly fight that off. But probably the big thing, watch for aphid. I think Shannon, we've been looking at our new foliars in spring wheat as well. Maybe give a recap what you're seeing there with the NutriScan on that.
Sure. Yep. It's been very similar. We're using the NutriScan on spring wheat. It's been very similar to the results we saw in winter wheat. Primarily, it's that potassium and then zinc, manganese, and boron. Those have been very consistent. Haven't seen copper show up as much. Winter wheat, that was kind of a focus this year, is that added copper as a deficiency. Spring wheat's primarily just those zinc, manganese, boron, and potassium. But we running the same treatments, running that full rate of Ignite, 104 ounces, just to get those higher ratings of zinc, manganese, boron, potassium, but then also those biostimulants. And that's maybe where we'll see some results this year if we end up getting warm again. That really helps with that abiotic stress tolerance, helping that plant to continue pushing ahead and maybe filling ahead at that point through those hot conditions. So run very similar treatments. You mentioned rust on Ryan and Bush, and I have mostly Bush in my area, in that Pullman South area. A little bit of Ryan, but you can find some stripe rust in Ryan. Bush is still holding pretty strong, but Ryan is breaking a little bit, which we've seen in the past, but just shows that Bush has a little bit better stripe rust resistance than Ryan does.
Starting to take a few seed orders. I really, till growers get in the field, start harvesting. Sounds like there's a Lewiston farmer that might actually get into some wheat this week. Yep. I think that lower country looks phenomenal. They're probably going to cut a pretty big crop in the Lewiston area. Variety-wise, Shannon, I just know Shine looks really, really good. It's holding up really good. Some of the Shine I was in last week, anywhere where you had double fertilized or double seeded, it's starting to go down. That's one negative with this rain coming this weekend. That's probably going to lay some wheat down. I think for Clearfield, I've always called it the Timothy hay of wheat. It was Encore, looks phenomenal. Everything around Genesee is standing up, looks good. We'll see how it yields. I think it's, just knowing it versus Shine, it is probably not going to yield quite with Shine, but looks phenomenal. There's a big field of Encore just south of Colfax. I saw it on Friday, and it's starting to lay down in the draw bottoms. But I don't know, you got a favorite out there?
Sure. Yeah, and I have a lot of Trident in my area, and Trident's looked pretty shaggy most of the year, but now that it's all headed out, a lot of good looking Trident, very high potential. That would probably be my go-to right now. Obviously, Shine is hard to beat. It's a lot of straight Shine, and it's probably going to be top yield again. Encore, like you mentioned, though, I'm really excited. Like last year, it still had a really good year, but it makes so much vegetation in tillers. It seems like on those hotter years, like last year, it can't support all those tillers and kind of gets beat up. This year, I'm pretty excited because I think we have the conditions where it could support a lot of those tillers. Not abort tillers like those hot, dry years. Maybe this rain, that's where we'll see it help support those tillers, fill heads. So I'm really excited for Encore too, and just think it's going to have a pretty good year.
I think when I was up at Cornwalls last week, they've got a big field of Mariner right across the road, which is sockeye stingray. Look pretty darn good. So fairly tall. Everything's tall this year. I'm kind of a perfectionist, so it drives me nuts when I walk out in the field and I see a lot of tall heads. I think a lot of that's, I don't know if that's on the genetic company or the crop improvement. You know, it just seems like some of these varieties are kind of ratty. Shine though, a lot of those tall awnless heads that are sticking up, you know, a foot to 16 inches above. One thing I've noticed this year, you walk up to those, the heads are a little more yellow. The flag leaves are almost turning like a fluorescent red. Come to find out, that's barley yellow dwarf that got infected. So seeing a little bit more of that, I think that's typically something we don't see on the Palouse, but you know, we had big wheat going into winter, of course, extremely mild winter. I don't think, you know, we really didn't get cold till about mid-December. So I think we did have, you know, some late flushes of aphid last fall. Of course, some of those were transmitting virus. Other than that, anything you want to add, Shannon?
No, I hope everybody can make it out to the field day this week up north, and then next week for Genesee. A lot of work goes into this, and we're really excited to share it with you guys. And hopefully, coming off of a rain, we won't have those 90-degree typical temperatures of our Genesee field day, and have some cooler temps. So,
if you, we sent out postcards a week ago, especially up north, because we're going to be traveling to 3 different locations. If you take your phone and you click on that, or take a picture of that URL code, that's going to bring up, you know, the map on Google Maps, so you can be able to drive to the trials. If you lost the postcard, go to our website. I checked that the other day. That works good too. You can bring it up, click on that code. It's going to bring up the map. We're going to start at Dave Cornwall's, Dave and Scott's, and then I believe the canola trial after that, which is on the Fairfield Plummer Highway. And then we're going to wrap up at Brian Teague's, which is, I think it's 2 miles south of Fairfield. We have some pretty neat things in there that we're looking at. Some new pulse crops that we're seeing, and yeah, we hope to see you there. And if we don't do another video before harvest, I think Shannon, we've got a lot of cutting to do. We've got a lot of trials. We're going to have to cut this 7 acres with the plot combine, unless we can get a farmer to donate a couple hours and come in and cut them for us. But yeah, we look forward to a really good harvest, I think, and yeah, hope to see you at our field days. Thank you.